Our next guest says that Korea is being treated unfairly from the Trump tariffs. Joining us now is Han Gu-yo, a former South Korean trade minister and now a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Great to have you with us today. Why do you say that Korea has been treated unfairly? I mean, it's sort of at a similar level than, say, Japan at 24%.
Korea has been a FTA partner with the United States for the last 13 years, and I believe that this FTA was really win-win. It really helped many U.S. producers and ranchers really grow market share in Korea. For example, the U.S. beef, Korea is the #1 market for U.S. beef. I mean, even bigger than 1.4 billion Chinese market. So I think it appears that Korea got the highest level of tariff among all FTA partners of the United States.
I remember even U.S. beef was such a big concession coming from South Korea. I covered the course FTA negotiations. There were huge protests here. Yeah. Do you think perhaps the leadership vacuum that we've seen here in Seoul might have contributed to the fact that South Korea was not able to get a better deal?
Unfortunately, I think that is the case. As we know, the President Trump really emphasized this, personal leader-to-leader direct communication. But for the last 4 months of this, political turmoil in Korea, unfortunately, Korea didn't have such an opportunity to have direct, communication with President Trump. And I think that really contributed to what we see today.
Even if there were direct negotiations, President Trump wants this sort of transactional diplomacy, right? Hyundai Motor, for example, announcing $20 billion of investments in the United States just last month. They weren't spared from any of these tariffs. What can Korea give President Trump to appease him?
Yes, right now it looks like it's really turmoil, but if you just step back and look at sort of medium, longer term, I think there's a really kind of a synergy to be created between U.S. and China. For example, one of the top policy priority of President Trump is to rebuild, these manufacturing sectors. And if you, remember, the Korea has been one of the biggest foreign investors in the U.S., semiconductor, EV, batteries. And right now, this shipbuilding, the defense industrial sector, bio, this energy, LNG, etc. These are the key strategic, focus for President Trump. And I think Korean companies can play a role in sort of collaborating with the U.S. and help the U.S. to achieve, that policy goal.
Do you think cooperation could be more difficult if we get a Democratic Party leadership here in South Korea who have traditionally been a little bit more skeptical with the relationship with Washington? Also, they had a different view when it comes to Beijing bilateral relations as well.
I don't think so. I think people tend to have this stereotype of what progressive versus conservative Korea looks like. But the world has changed, especially this geopolitical landscape in Northeast Asia, and then with all this massive tariff, and especially with this 4 months of really, paralysis of politics and the economy, I see that more sort of pragmatic approach. I mean, no matter which candidate or party comes into power, I think there's a really widespread mood of sort of urgency and, crisis, mood in Korea. So I think this election will be like, is the economy stupid? The type of, the election, and also change election. So I remain hopeful that if, in 2 months' time, Korea put in place this new political leadership, I think that could really provide this political momentum to rebuild this the core this ally and the partnership with the United States.
You talked about the changing world order, right? South Korea has benefited from a liberal free trade economic order around the world for decades. Now with more state interventionism just around the world, and we're talking not only about the U.S., we're talking about Europe, obviously China as well. Where does South Korea stand?
I think, as you mentioned, I think we are entering into a new era of post-globalization. I mean, Korea has been one of the biggest beneficiary of this, this hyper-globalization for the last, few decades. But now, as you mentioned, state intervention, return of industrial policy, and retreat of this WTO and multilateral rule-based international order and also securitization of economic issue. I think these are the new normal that we have to face. So, I mean, I think it's time for Korea also to change gears for like structural reform. I mean, now there's a structural reform around the world, and also Korea has to change, structurally.
We saw that the new normal was also potentially hedging and de-risking away from China.
Right.
But we're seeing these enormous tariffs on Southeast Asia, for example. You were just in Vietnam.
Right.
How does this really affect what companies can actually do here?
Yeah. I think ASEAN is very important for Korea, Japan, and even for the United States, because I think one of the important strategic goal of the U.S. is to really accelerate de-risking, or diversification from China-reliant, supply chain. And realistically, the ASEAN play a very important role to not replace, but play a sort of alternative role to accelerate this de-risking procedure. But if the U.S. really, imposes massive tariff on many these ASEAN, countries, I think it could slow down this achieving the strategic goal of the U.S. government.
Han-Gu, really good to have you with us here in our Seoul studio, brand new. Thank you so much for joining us, former South Korean Trade Minister and now